So it's my understanding that I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes, and then there's sort of a Q&A period, and I think I have too many slides. The first chunk of it is focused more on applying to graduate school, and then there's a little bit at the end that's more about what's it like to be in graduate school. I'm wondering if maybe people would think that the first part is more useful, how to get in versus what's it like once you get there. Is that, I mean, raise your hand if you, I guess, feel otherwise and really want to plan ahead. Okay, so then if I end up sort of rushing through anything, it'll be the stuff at the end, which is probably for the best. So you guys are all psychology undergraduate honor students. Yes, okay. And you think you're interested in being a psychological scientist. And so the first step of that is applying to graduate school, which is a long but hopefully exciting and not too stress-inducing process. So I feel like, just a little overview. So graduate school, it's advanced training in a specific area of psychology. So what you have done as an undergraduate, there's a lot of kind of general knowledge about psychology, although there's also some specialization. Graduate school is even more sort of a narrow focus on a specific domain of psychological science. So you can, again, think of this as training to become a psychological scientist. At least that's the vantage point that I'm going to give you today, and I'll talk about that in a bit. So why would you want to do this? There are a number of career outcomes. So kind of the most obvious and the one I know most about is going into academia and being a professor of some stripe. The other alternative, depending on what kind of graduate training you do, is to become a clinical psychologist, where you're maybe working more hands-on with patients, or at least supervising other people who are doing work with patients. How many people are, it's pretty popular, so how many people have that kind of career goal in mind? Okay, well that's good, because that happens to be something that I know more about than some of these other career outcomes, unfortunately. But we certainly do have graduates of our program go on to other career paths. So you might be an industrial psychologist and work for a company of some kind. We have graduates who, I don't know if we have graduates, but there are graduates out there who do things like work for Facebook or social media, if you have expertise in social psychology. But one thing that you might want to think about, depending on what your career goals are, and I'm sure you're a diverse group and you want to do different kinds of things. So particularly if you're interested in working with patients and the mentally ill, you could do social work, counseling, psychiatry, in some cases school psychology. If you are interested in the neural bases for behavior, you might want to consider going into a neuroscience graduate program. A lot of the people, students in our program, and in fact the chair of our department has a background in biology. So if you're interested in the biological bases of behavior, that's another possibility. School psychology, we have a school psychology program on our campus. So, my point being that it's worth thinking about what you want to do and how well a PhD in psychology matches those goals. And kind of the other piece, I'm going to come back to this, taking a year or two off if you're not sure what you want to do, I think is a really great idea, and there are a lot of ways that you can use that time productively to be a more competitive applicant down the line. I'll get back to that in a bit, but there are a lot of, I can sort of remember what it was like to be your age and think, I got to figure out what I'm going to do with my life, because it's sort of scary to feel like you don't know what the next step is. But rushing that kind of thing is not necessarily great, especially when you're talking about a commitment of the magnitude of going to graduate school. So, don't be afraid to contemplate the benefits of trying to get work that is related to what you think you might want to do. And I'll get back to that, maybe taking a year or two off. I'll get back to that. Let's see. And that doesn't mean, actually one more point, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're working as a researcher full-time. This could be part-time, this could be volunteering in a lab, and that'll kind of help you, well, I'll get to that in a bit. So, there's a, okay, I'm not going to put it that way because it's a little gross, but the thing that you want to bear in mind whenever you're getting someone's opinion about something, we all have them. You want to consider the source. So what I'm going to tell you about is certainly colored by what I know about. And, you know, I know about a certain kind of program and a certain kind of training. And I don't want you to take my informal advice as something that you should use to replace actual data or specific information provided by a particular program. So, you know, that's me. I'm Elizabeth Hayden. I have a PhD in clinical psychology, although I'm not a practicing clinical psychologist. I did a postdoc in molecular genetics at Indiana University School of Medicine. Right now, the reason I'm here instead of someone else is I am not only a professor in psychology, but I'm the associate chair of psychology, and that means that I'm in charge of graduate studies, or they say I'm in charge. Some days it feels like I'm more in charge than others. Other days it feels like I'm being dragged by a team of unruly horses. But anyhow, so my primary home is in psychology, and I'm a psychologist. I have a number of other affiliations, and that's not an unusual thing because our field is very multidisciplinary. And when you're thinking about going to graduate school, that's something that you should expect if you go to the kind of school that I'm going to talk about. So, you know, more specifically, I can tell you a lot about PhD programs that are very science-oriented. I can tell you a bit about clinical psychology training programs because that's something I have gone through myself and I'm affiliated with our training program. I can't speak directly to other kinds of programs. So, you know, there are a lot of places that offer the PsyD in Canada, but, you know, there are different kinds of degrees that you can get. There are different kinds of training models that you can get. What this also means is this is my disclaimer, this is shameless bragging. My graduate students would die if they could see, you know, that you guys can, well, no, don't tell them.
I told Andrew you were going to do it for sure.
Really? You did? Okay.
Like,
wow,
no.
I'm pretty predictable. No, I totally, like, I'm telling you about the kind of program that we have here at Western, which means I have a pretty big lab. I work with graduate students. It's absolutely the best part of my job, 100%. When you get a great graduate student, it's exciting. When you get someone who wants to be there and is as committed as you are to doing the kind of work that you do, it's the best. So, you know, I can tell you about what it would be like to go somewhere and hopefully be that kind of student who's excited and engaged, and hopefully work with someone who is excited and engaged about working with you. And so, like, okay, I don't have much time, but I can't. This is my research great-great-granddad, and it's their great-great-great-granddad. We're all at a meeting, and they're presented some posters, and that's the kind of thing graduate students do. You know, you go, you talk about science, you learn, and it can be amazingly, I think, rewarding for both the student and certainly for me. You know, I publish with all my students. This is a horrible slide, but, you know, they're my very, very best collaborators, absolutely. So I kind of underlined anyone who's a trainee in my lab, and together we work really, really hard, and we get a lot of work done, and we kind of geek out on it and have fun. So, you know, if that kind of thing sounds exciting to you, then graduate school in clinical psychology or just psychology might be for you. This is one of our graduates. We do have people who go on to academic jobs. This is a graduate student from my lab. She's now at Notre Dame doing a postdoc, something that's increasingly common if you're interested in eventually working as a professor somewhere. You might think, oh, Lord, even more school after getting a PhD, but this is something that is pretty typical in the field these days. As a way of just kind of getting some additional training and bolstering whatever skill set you might have from graduate school. Another professor of ours, so we have, I think our IO program places a lot of the academics that study industrial organizational psychology in Canada. So, you know, I'm not only bragging about my students, I'm bragging about Western. I think we have a great department. We're big. We have about 50 full-time faculty. We're diverse. We study lots of different things. You know, ranging from more hands-on applied kinds of research to research that really focuses on the brain. We have all these different research institutes and areas that graduate students are involved in, including Brain and Mind, which many of you have heard of. We have the collaborative graduate program in migration and ethnic relations, animal cognition. These are all programs that are kind of, if you were a graduate student involved in them, you'd still be a graduate student in psychology, but they're more sort of specialized domains and ways to really gain depth of knowledge about a specific kind of research question. So we have a lot of students, a whole lot. About 140 master's and PhD students when you take the whole group as a whole. And we're a research-based graduate program. And so what that means is, we take students who want to do the kind of science that someone here at Western who's affiliated in psychology, if that's the program you're in, by and large, let me back up a second. It's sort of based on a mentorship model, meaning that if there's some specific research question that you're interested in that we do not really cover, we don't have any faculty members who do that kind of work, this would not be a good place for you. This would be a good place for someone who, says, I'm really interested in depression, I'm interested in emotional development, I'm interested in hormonal stress responses, like, I'm going to go to Western and work with Elizabeth Hayden, which I don't recommend for the record. But, my point being, find someone here or elsewhere who is looking at something that you think is really interesting to you, because that's going to maximize your chances of getting in. It's going to maximize your chances of getting to do something that you actually find interesting and rewarding. So if you just have this sort of global idea, I want to be a PhD in psychology, that's probably not going to get you the kind of training that will be very satisfying. One thing to know, graduate school, in contrast to, I would say, most undergraduate experiences, it's a full-time job. You're there all year round. Including summers, you don't go home. I mean, they take vacations and things like that. We're not total monsters, but our graduate students are around year-round, if you like what you do and are engaged, that's a good thing. In fact, you might like it so much that you never leave. Somebody like me. If you don't like what you're doing, it's a long, hard slog. Okay, so it's worth really thinking about. When you're applying to graduate school, you got to think about what is it that I want to study, and you're gonna be able to answer that question based on different kinds of experiences you've had. This will include things like coursework. It might include research experience that you've had as an undergraduate student. I say, like, maximizing your interests to what a program can offer you. If you want to go to a research-oriented PhD program in psychology, that match is really important. Now, that doesn't mean you have to pick one thing. So for instance, when I applied to graduate school, I thought, I'm really interested in studying mood disorders, but I also think I might like to study personality disorders. And so I applied to different programs that could match that interest. And that doesn't make you look flighty or like you don't know what you want to do. But you don't want to be so broad that it doesn't seem like you're a good match or that you've given it a lot of thought, right? So it's okay to have a couple of different interests, particularly if they're kind of related. It might be kind of weird to say, well, I want to go study numerical cognition, but if I can't do that, I'm going to go study ethnic relations in China. Like, that's pretty different, right? But if you can think of a couple of topics that are of interest to you, and there's a professor at Calgary who does one, and a professor here who looks at the other domain, that's not bad. You're young. No one's expecting you to have your future research program written in stone. Now, little qualification here. I was sort of thinking today, like, the timing of this is a little not so great for you guys, because I would say if you want to go to a program like Western, research-oriented program, PhD, the single most important thing that you can do to improve your chances of getting in is to have relevant research experience, defined broadly, like full stop. That's the thing to do. So if you know that you want to be a neuroscientist, and so you want to go somewhere and learn about, I don't know, how stroke affects movement by, using imaging techniques. Try to get relevant research experience. It doesn't mean it has to be in that specific domain, but it would be good if you had had some experience with imaging data, for instance, or something of the like. So, if I had to say it, like obviously grades are important, GRE scores in some cases are important, but there's sort of a minimum threshold that once you get above that, it becomes hard to differentiate one candidate or one applicant from another, right? So if you have a GPA of 87 and somebody else has one of 82, who cares? The difference is not that great, but if one person has relevant research experience, then that will really catch someone's eye, namely a faculty member who's looking to recruit a graduate student. And so hopefully many of you already have that, right? Because we're talking about applying to graduate school, and I'm saying the most important thing you can have is this, and some of you may be thinking, oh, I don't have a lot of that. That might make getting into graduate school challenging. I mean, I'm not saying don't try, again, my opinion. But it's quite common for students who apply to graduate school to have some kind of experience with data entry, data coding, data collection, maybe interacting with research participants or patients, maybe not. There's no single research experience that should be valued above all others, but to the extent that you can make the case, like I've had a taste of whatever this Kool-Aid is in undergrad, and I'm ready to just dive right in and drink a whole lot more as a graduate student, that will give the program and the person with whom you would like to work more confidence that you know what it is that you're committing to, and that you have a good reason for saying you're interested in it, right? So mostly when I have graduate students, they don't have to have done, how could they have done the exact same work that I do, because it's my work, unless they were in my lab, but by and large, maybe they've worked with someone who does child development, maybe they've worked with someone who studies parenting, maybe they've worked with someone who collects imaging data or other psychophysiological data. And so they can come to me and I can say, okay, well, you have some kind of sense of what this work is about, and that's very appealing, okay? That's the number one thing you can do. And it's going to help you figure out whether this kind of work is really for you. So research can be really time-consuming and really tedious, and you're on a thin, what those of us in the field call a thin reinforcement schedule, meaning you can work and work and work and work and work and work and not necessarily get anything that's going to make you feel great about that work on a regular basis, okay? So the point being, if you're waiting for those intrinsic or extrinsic rewards, that can be very challenging and not very motivating. But if you find this stuff intrinsically interesting, it doesn't matter so much that like, oh, my paper got rejected, or I didn't get that scholarship I wanted, or this other thing, because that kind of thing happens and it can be painful and arduous, to deal with. But if you at least are interested in what you're doing as a scientist, that makes up for a whole lot. It's having that research experience is going to help you learn about the research questions that you're interested in, and hopefully you've already done this, and then you can make an informed decision about graduate school. This is sort of an esoteric point, but if you had research experience that allows you to become sort of an educated consumer of science about the domain that interests you for graduate school, that's really important. So I guess put differently, like a lot of the time we'll see grad school applicants who know how to use M+, or they've collected EEG data before, or they have this specific skill set, and that's great. But it's also really nice and compelling when someone comes in and they have some kind of sense like what the big picture questions are for that field. And it's hard to get that unless you have some research experience. You want to see how those small pieces hopefully speak to a much bigger and more important question, okay? Because otherwise, you're in the lab, you're coding something, and you're thinking like, well, what difference does it make if my coding is reliable with someone else? It can be very easy to just see the trees and not be able to see the whole forest. But having some research experience is going to help you get to that point, if that makes sense. Okay. Okay, yeah. So if you don't have this experience, this would be a point where it would make a lot of sense to think about taking a year off to get it. Just even from a practical standpoint, that's the thing that is a real advantage to have for graduate school. And the rest of this, sorry, I forgot I had stuff on here, but it's basically what I just told you. Okay, so where to apply? Wow, I had some text on here. I don't know. Oh, okay. These slides are a combination of it's stuff that I edited and also a few slides that I inherited and did not change because they were fine. But so where do you apply? Well, depends on what you want to do. Here are a couple of books that I think are kind of interesting resources. This one is kind of old, but it's kind of worth a read, I think. The top one, Ramona, do you happen to know? We used to have that.
It's Walden Library.
Okay.
There's a subscription to the top one there, and the Canadian schools are at the back of it. The whole
At the back.
section of it.
That's rude.
But there's a Canadian section at the back.
Okay. So Canadian section, uses the metric system. But that's probably worth looking at. Look at departmental websites. Okay, there's a lot of information to be gleaned from that, and talk to your professors. Most of us are not horrible people. There are some exceptions, but how are you going to know who the exceptions are unless you talk to us? I'm kidding. But you can find out where somebody went to learn how to do the kind of work that they're doing, if it's the kind of work that is of interest to you. What kind, hey, Dr. Hayden, what kinds of clinical psychology programs do you think are great? I can tell you that really easily. And anyone in my department can do that kind of thing for you for whatever domain it is that you're interested in. But these are worthwhile ways to get information. And again, I'm just going to go back to that point. When I was applying to grad school, I had a couple of ideas about what I wanted to study, and I did not apply to schools where I couldn't do that because I knew, and you guys should know, that having a match with someone in that department is pretty critical, right? So if we have someone who applies here to the clinical psychology program and they say, I really want to study schizophrenia. Unfortunately, right now, we don't really have anybody who does that specifically. And so they wouldn't be a good match and they would probably not be admitted. So this is going to help you find those programs that match what it is you want to do. Make sense? Okay. Now, contact prospective supervisors. So these are, you said, okay, look, I have a list of people who are doing work that I think is exciting and interesting. I have some relevant background experience that I think would make me a good match to them. I'm going to get in touch and say, hey, don't say hey. Do not do that. But, it's fine to send someone an email introducing yourself. Now is the time to think about doing that. But think about why you're contacting them, okay? Because you can actually make a bad impression in the process of doing this. Are they taking students? You might want to check the website first. But it's not bad to confirm that, right? Because you don't want to spend a lot of money applying to a program only to find out that the one person with whom you would like to work is not taking students. Keep it short. I actually got a a DVD movie from someone once who wanted to apply here to work with me, and it was interesting, but no, she did not get an interview. So keep it short, hit the relevant points, say who you are, I'm so-and-so, hey, I worked with Louis Schmidt at McMaster. He does work that's kind of like yours. I would love to come train with you as a graduate student, blah, 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 that kind of thing. You can, say, would you be interested in someone who has done the kind of work that I've done? That's an okay thing to say. Just one little question. How would you address someone with a PhD? Anybody? Here, thank you. Doctor? Yeah, doctor would be okay. There's another one. If there are someone who works at Western, for instance. It rhymes with schmosher. That's terrible. Professor, okay. Dr. Hayden, Professor Hayden, fine. Mrs. Hayden, no bueno. Miss Hayden, flattering, but no. So, make sure you address your email properly, because that can actually be pretty off-putting if someone is, I think, especially as a woman, women have kind of worked hard to get ahead in academia, and, so just, maybe think about that. So get their titles right. Probably doctor is best, I would say. If you're, I don't know, professor or doctor, go with doctor. Use a formal tone, don't be overly casual. Sometimes I get students who say, can we please meet? And, honestly, clinical psychology is so popular, I could not and would not have time to meet with all the people who potentially want to come to Western. It sounds like I'm feeling myself. I am not. It's just, clinical is popular. So you could offer to meet with someone, and someone might think, yeah, that's great, but other people, it's like, I don't really have time for that, and maybe they'll just say, I don't have time for that. So, you can offer, but don't necessarily expect it, and don't take it personally if someone does not have time to do that, because a lot of the time it's like, submit your application, I want to look over all your materials, we have an interview day. If it gets to that point, then I love to meet you and make sure you know everything there is to know about coming to Western and work with me. But people get busy, and so don't be offended if that does not get you a lot of traction. So yeah, make sure there's someone there who is doing the kind of work that you want to do. Step number one, make sure they're taking students. This is all going to save you money. And then you'll hear back. I would say a good target is to have a list of maybe 10 schools, 8 to 10. Having more opportunities to apply maximizes your chances of getting in, but only if those programs are a good match to what you want to do. So don't just apply everywhere, so you can say you have 8. Make sure there are 8 schools that make sense. If they don't make sense, then 6 schools that make sense is better. 4 schools, etc. When to apply? Now, more or less. Like, that's why I'm sort of saying the timing of this is a little weird. Most programs have December through March deadlines. I would say March is actually kind of late. Ours is around the 1st of January. I would say that's pretty typical. So, if you're not already working on your materials, but you think you want to apply to grad school this year, chop chop, time to get with it. What's the competition like? How likely are you to get in? These are kind of old data. I apologize for that. I did not have time to update, but they're in the ballpark of what we get, now. So we get a lot of applicants. About 20% get offers of admission of that 30 of those 300, and a little over half accept. So, some students come here, they get an offer, they decide they want to go somewhere else, whatever, all kinds of reasons could account for that. Clinical is by far the most competitive program. We get the lion's share of applicants to our, graduate program in psychology. And the acceptance rate tends to be pretty small, it's about 10%. So, again, apply to multiple programs. You're dead set on going to grad school. maximize your odds by applying to multiple programs that are a good fit to what you want to do. Your application, let's see, maybe I'm going to skip ahead because I know we don't have that much time. I hope you guys know this. A lot of this stuff is on our website, so you can also look there. GRE scores, depends on the program. Clinical and IO here still require it. The other areas don't. I say at least 70 percentile or higher on both verbal and quant are needed to avoid raised eyebrows. And so by that I mean we all get together and we're like, oh, I want to take this student. And then someone might say, oh, well, but they're only in the 60th percentile for their quant. And then you got to have a little discussion. And somebody might say, talk you out of trying to interview that student, right? So higher is better for people who care about GREs, obviously. But I would say if you're 70% or higher, that's not crazy. Your application, boy, I have way too much. Letters of reference are really, really important. You want them to be from professors. You want them to know about you. It is not bad at all to give them a packet that has your application materials so they can maybe look at your research statement and write a more informed letter of support for you. Make it easy for them to write you a letter, okay? So online submissions of letters are increasingly common. But in cases where programs want a hard copy, they're still out there. Give them a stamped addressed envelope. Make it easy. Let's see. And I would say also, don't hesitate. Say, for instance, you have a bad grade in stats, but you have a good reason for it, other than you hate stats. If that's your reason, maybe. But you know, say we're having a family crisis or something like that, you might say, you know, if it were a student who had worked in my lab and I knew them to be a good student and I thought they should get into graduate school and they're like, I'm really worried about my stats grade, it wasn't that great for this reason, I could maybe address that in my letter. So if you have a professor with whom you have a close relationship, a working relationship, and they're going to write you a letter, that's not an unreasonable thing to ask if you know them well. Now, if some student that I barely knew asked me, can you please make a good case for me to get in? No, my stats grade is awful. I'd say, well, no. So, you know, it should be someone who knows you and has a good opinion of you. Your application, okay. So please make sure it is composed well. Check your grammar, check your spelling critically, okay? This is your best opportunity. You have to have sort of this statement of interest. Why do I want to come to Western or Calgary or wherever? This is your moment to show that you are a good match to that program and that faculty member with whom you would like to work, okay? Here is where you make a case. I'm deeply interested in looking at children's emotional development and its biological correlates as predictors of depression, and here's why. And all these reasons, you know, my past research experience, and therefore I'm applying here and I want to work with Elizabeth Hayden, or, you know, you get it. Like, this is your place to really make an ironclad argument of why you're a good match to that program. I can't overemphasize that. That's, I think, a #1 reason why students don't even get in the front door, is they write something in their personal statement that is just irrelevant to research or just shows that they're not a good match to current faculty. It just doesn't, that's not a good strategy. Okay. And also, this is where you get to show that you can write. Writing is really, really, really important. The other thing I'll just mention really quickly, and I hate to say this, I don't want anyone to feel stigmatized if they've had an experience with a mental health problem. Many of us have. Anxiety disorders, depression, are incredibly common, okay? And nevertheless, it's not a good strategy to say, I want to study eating disorders because of my own personal struggles with eating disorders. It's not because people are biased against you. I think the idea is that that's sort of viewed as inappropriate disclosure of personal information, right? So like the same way you probably wouldn't say, You know, I want to go to medical school because I have a lot of tumors or something. I don't know. Like, just don't do it. Even if you think it's wrong or like you should be able to speak publicly about it. I'm not here to debate that point. I'm here to give you advice on how to successfully or maximize your odds of getting into grad school, and don't do that, okay? For any number of reasons, do not. Okay. Here is an article. Are we going to post any of this? Ramona?
Actually, what I've done every year is have send the
Okay.
PowerPoint.
Okay.
To PDF, and then you can contact the psychology graduates. I am in New York. I can send you that. We're also taking this today, and we will put a link off our website for that as well.
That's awful. Okay. Everyone hates their own voice, right? Awful. You can take a look at this article. It's a great resource. Damaging personal statements, discussing blah, blah, blah. I think really the big one that I see a lot of is talking a lot about personal mental health, being too altruistic, too much self-disclosure. Basically, if you do what I said a couple of slides ago, that is, use this as the opportunity to say, here are my research interests, here's why I have them, this is why I want to work with person X in your department, you're not going to do any of this other stuff, okay? You won't have space. So if you do the thing that I said, you will not do these things, and that is good. I'm going to look for the most important points. Yeah, just one note, you want letters of recommendation from academics, okay, professors. It's okay if one of them doesn't know you that well, if the others do, you know, so maybe one person, I have students who took my course that I teach, they volunteered in my lab, and then they did an honors thesis. I know them pretty well. Sometimes I've written letters for students who've taken my course and did a good job, but if they have letters from someone else who knows them quite well, that's okay. Don't get them from travel agents, therapists, etc. Poor writing skills, okay, we've talked about that. Interviewing, well, we really are out of time, which is kind of a shame because I think this is maybe the best part. But we will put this, actually I have a really good article that hits a lot of these points. I will ask Ramona to circulate that as well, however that can be done. Because the interview day is important. Be prepared, read the person's papers, bring a list of questions, actually ask the questions. Sometimes people get tired and by the end of the day they're like, I don't have any questions left, and that makes you look like you're not interested even if you're just tired. Yeah?
And just on the previous slide, you had some like said, persons who are appropriate, and you had a list.
Yeah.
And you had to say that was maybe inappropriate.
Oh, okay. Is that what I said?
But yes, just a little.
Okay. Well, that's an unfortunate typo. Do as I said, not as I wrote, I guess. Don't ask your travel agent. Don't ask your Avon lady. Don't ask your plumber. Whatever. Get letters from academics who know you. And if you get an interview, remember everyone there is part of the admissions process potentially. A lot of the time we have a little event at the end of the day where prospective students get to interact with current students. We've had applicants go and try to pick up current students and get really drunk and be really poorly behaved and gross, and some of them are still famous to this day. It's like, you remember 10 years ago that guy? Like, yeah, I sure do. Don't do that. Be on your very, very best behavior all day long, no matter who you're talking to. You could be rude to the administrative assistant, and she might say to a faculty member, that person doesn't seem very nice. So just, be yourself, and as long as you're not a jerk, you'll be fine. Just remember the whole day, you're being evaluated, but you're also evaluating the program. You want to interview. Is it okay if I take a few more minutes? If people need to get out, I won't be offended if you need to flee. You want to talk to someone, the person with whom you have applied to work, about their mentorship style. Say things like, how often do you meet with your students? Do you have lab meetings? How involved are you in helping a student develop a research idea? How does someone get authorship on a paper in your lab? What about summer support? Now, obviously, there's a nice way to ask these questions. You don't want to go in, like, first thing out of the gate, pound your fist on their desk and say, how much money are you going to pay me during the summer? You want to broach these topics in a thoughtful way that is polite and gracious. But remember, you are interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you. And so you're there to find out what it would be like to work with that person. Because if there's a mismatch in that domain, it can be very challenging to get through school. So these are all things like, what do you expect of your trainees, that kind of thing. Another point, sometimes applicants really, really, really want to go to graduate school, like no matter what. And the advisor that they've applied to work with is awful. And current students will in fact say, don't come here, this person's awful. And they come to grad school to work with that person anyhow. It's not a good idea. I mean, you're grown up, so do as you will. But if a current student, you could have a falling out with one student, as an advisor, that might not mean much. But, if you are hearing from multiple people, they take forever to give me feedback on any of my work, I never meet with them, they are demanding or mean or sexual harasser or who knows, If you're hearing that from multiple sources, take heed, okay? So talk to the current students and say, what is it really like to be here? What are the good things? What are the bad things? This is more what it's like to be in grad school, so I think that's probably a reasonable point for me to stop and answer any questions that people might have. Anybody has any? Friday afternoon, everybody's tired. Yeah?
In regard to references, if you're in like another discipline as well, should you get references from those professors or should you avoid that?
That's a really good question. I think it depends on what it is that you're going to grad school to do. So tell me if I'm understanding properly, but if I were looking at an applicant's full application and they wanted to work with me, I'm in psychology, they had a couple of letters from professors of psychology and they also had one from someone in biology, because my lab collects a lot of biological data, that'd be awesome. I'd be excited to see that. Now, if they had a couple of letters from someone in psychology and then someone from the basket weaving department, that's not so great, right? So, but if these are people who are speaking to skills that you have that will be appealing to that person, then it absolutely, like I said at the beginning, research is multidisciplinary now. And so if that kind of shows that you have that multidisciplinary training. So I think, is that kind of getting at what you wanted? Okay. I should have asked that earlier. Anybody else? Yeah.
You mentioned that sometimes students that aren't super happy with their graduate program experience. Is that implied?
Wait, sorry, they're not super happy with
like their supervisor.
Yeah.
Graduate experience. Is that implied that they're not on mobility?
Oh, well, that's a really good question. And I feel like this is going to sound like a wishy-washy answer, but it kind of depends, again, on what you do, right? So if someone came here to work specifically with me and they really wanted to do the kind of thing that I do, there might not be someone else here who could supervise them effectively in that. So moving might be hard. Most programs, almost all, I think this is clear by now, but you're applying your program to work with a specific person, right? And so that's kind of how you get in the door. We don't take students who don't have someone who wants to supervise them. And that's true of most programs like Western. Now, particularly for certain research groups, there are lots of people who look at kind of similar issues. And so in that case, it wouldn't be hard to move from one supervisor to another. But I'd say try to go in with a lot of confidence that you picked the person that you want to work with, because it can be very awkward to, I'm sure you can imagine, it's like, oh, I'm not getting along with that person, how do I get out and go somewhere else? Like, that is not fun for anyone. So, do your best to make a good choice. But, in many cases, it would be possible to move and have it be reasonable, but depending on what you do, if it's really esoteric, that might be kind of challenging.
Also, I have another question.
Sure.
You mentioned that there's strength in showing like multidisciplinary experience. If your multidisciplinary experience is kind of outside the realm of where you're with the person you're applying to,
Mhm.
it's still like advantageous to like, have a multidisciplinary.
Well, it could be. For sure, I think psychology, most of my colleagues here at Western would say, yeah, I study behavior, but I also study the brain, or I also study psychophysiology or something else, and so that's multidisciplinary. I do have a few colleagues who look at something that is really, really specific. And so if that's the kind of work you want to do, then I guess the multidisciplinary piece of it does not apply as much or at all. But I think if you're kind of just talking about the odds, I think most of us in the field draw upon kind of multiple disciplines, especially in clinical psychology. And brain and mind, I think most of the neuroscientists would also say that they're pretty strongly multidisciplinary. So I think it's also good to do that kind of work because it gives you a better sense of what it is you really want to do, which is important, right? So again, I guess I'm getting back to that point that it's all about your match with that person. You obviously don't want to make up a story about who you are and what you're interested in when you apply. So my point being, if you're applying to 10 different universities, don't come up with 10 different personal identities to match that place, right? Because that's a recipe for unhappiness. You're going to go somewhere and just, oh, I thought you wanted to do this. You don't want to do that. But to the extent that you can tailor an application a bit to each specific person, that's reasonable, as long as you're not telling a story that's not true, if that makes sense, about the things you want to do and the experiences that you've had. Yeah.
How helpful is it to do experiences like volunteering at a mental health institute or like clubs to the application? Because I know you touched a lot upon like research and how important that is.
Yeah, that's a good question. It, again, sort of depends on the person that you'd be working with. I know I have a couple of colleagues in the clinical program who really like to see that. I don't care if someone has done it, but it doesn't get them nearly as far in terms of me wanting to work with them as research experience. And I would say that's generally true here at Western. Having said that, say for instance you want to work in a lab where they do a lot of hands-on research with a specific patient population, and you have experience with that patient population, that might be pretty useful, right? So Parkinson's patients or patients with psychotic disorders, it's like I volunteered in this, like that's great. But I think it's fair to say that for most people, that's not going to make up for a lack of research experience. So if you have that, and then above and beyond you have this other experience, it's great. And with some people, it might get you very far. It just kind of depends on what they want. But I don't think anyone would say that you can just do volunteer stuff and not do any research, right? I mean, I'm exaggerating, but you get my point. Yeah.
When you're talking about emailing them like our statement of interest, you mentioned like you use you as an example. Would it be like how many profs would we want to mention email, like one or two?
Oh, to email them or send
No,
a...
send like in your application you mentioned like your research system you want to work with this individual.
Oh, right. Okay, so say you're applying to Western, is it okay to say, I want to work with this person, but I also want to work with that person? It depends on whether it makes sense.
Like if they're kind of doing the same thing, would it be
Yeah, like to me, like if someone's like, I really want to work with Elizabeth Hayden, but I also want to work with this person who does something completely different, I find that a little off-putting. Not because I'm an egomaniac, I promise. I'm not. It just makes me think that they don't necessarily really know what they want to do. But for instance, a lot of the time people will say they'd like to work with me and they'd like to work with David Dozwa. And we both study depression, we have some research overlap. That seems a bit more reasonable. I will say, particularly for clinical psychology, a lot of the time you can list multiple people. And I'm not saying don't do that, but generally speaking, if say I'm second or third or whatever on somebody's preferred supervisor list. This is true for anyone, I think, in clinical, because we get so many applicants. They are probably not going to get an interview with me, just because it's nothing personal. Like I said, I swear to God, I'm not an egomaniac, but it seems like they're really more interested in something else. Meanwhile, I have 55 other applications who, listed me first, like that. That seems like they really want to, work with me, right? So, so there's a bit of a gamble, I would say. Well, let's put it this way. Your odds, list the person that you really want to work with first. If you list other people, make sure it makes sense. And also just be aware of the fact that for many of us, if we're further down the list, it decreases your odds of actually working with them, which is okay if you really have a stronger preference for someone else. Anything else? Okay. Well, thank you guys. Good luck.